tonight on The New Reality.
Make sure we're all 6 feet apart, fellas!
The return of kids' sports.
It's going to look different than it was a few months ago.
The future of daycare.
We don't know how much longer we can do this. What are our options here?
Helping Indigenous youth.
They're dealing with isolation. They're stressed, more stressed than they've ever been before.
Will travel take off?
We are now at a period of time that we need to learn how to coexist with the virus.
And preventing a second wave.
If there's one thing we've learned about this virus is that we can't underestimate it.
Hello, I'm Dawna Friesen. We're at that time of the year that's usually so exciting for kids. School is out for the summer, there are grad parties going on, kids are moving on to the next stage in their lives. This year, all those milestones are being marked virtually. Tonight, we're going to dig into the impact that's having physically and psychologically. Most kids haven't seen the inside of a classroom in months, have hardly seen their friends, and haven't played organized sports. Screen time is up. Activity is down. A new study from Participaction gave Canadian kids a D+ on activity. It found only 39% of kids aged 5 to 17 met federal guidelines for physical activity. The one bright spot? 77% of 5 to 19-year-olds participated in some kind of organized sport or physical activity. Both kids and parents want to get back into the game. John Waugh takes us through the first tentative steps down that path.
These sounds are music to every hockey lover's ears. But at the local rink, it's a whole new reality.
It's different. They have to come fully dressed, and that actually has taken away from their locker room time with the team. But it hasn't seemed to faze the kids at all. I think they're just happy to be back on the ice.
From designated entrances and walkways to only a few parents in the stands, the Fraser Valley Kings hockey program in Abbotsford, British Columbia has drawn up a whole new play for the COVID-19 pandemic.
Obviously, keeping the kids 6 feet apart, there's an element of the game that you can't teach or work on right now, but there's a lot of the skills and the basics, you know, as the kids get through, it's about the fundamentals.
The spring tournaments have been cut.
I like scoring goals and playing games.
The focus now is on player development.
We haven't played in months, so I kind of forgot some things.
Make sure we're all 6 feet apart, fellas!
With a heavy emphasis on the importance of social distancing on the ice.
You'll be staying away from people, not too far, but not too close.
And with a limit of one parent per player at the rink, this camera and a couple of clicks online allow hockey moms or dads to watch their child's progress from home.
The families, they were loyal to me, and I promised to work really hard for them to get them back in the rink and give them a program that was different than originally thought, but you know, as a group, they wanted to be here.
Getting back to activities like hockey could have easily been benched until a later date. But all levels of government across Canada have prioritized a return to play because of the added benefit sport brings during this pandemic.
It really demonstrates the power of sport in terms of providing physical and mental health benefits, but also that connection in the community, how it brings people together.
The Fraser Valley Kings are following the guidelines provided by Via Sport, a legacy program of the 2010 Vancouver Olympic Games, and now the BC government's liaison for organized sports.
The guidelines do kind of get handed down to the local club, and it's really up to them to say, okay, how do we implement this now with what we've got, and do we need to wait? Can we do this now? What do we need to adjust?
No matter what the sport, the key message is, while it might be good to be back,
and it's going to look different than it was a few months ago, and it also may look different from community to community.
Based on those guidelines, BC Hockey's current phase includes social distancing, no non-essential travel, and modified play.
No league competitions, no training camps right now, and all of these things for now.
Yeah, it's still fun. I wish I was playing games still.
For associations like Ridge Meadows Minor Hockey, the future of this coming fall is far from certain.
Speculation is the challenge right now, and we've worked really hard. We have a number of different scenarios and plans in place.
The season will almost certainly start with skills development. Many are still holding on to hope for the good old hockey game.
We'd love to return to some form of gameplay if we could. It might start out as small area gameplay, and then maybe roll into a 3-on-3 or 4-on-4 format if we have to. Ideally, though, we want to play 5-on-5 hockey, and that's the goal.
Now, spectators are a major concern for every sport organization because there are plenty of parents, siblings, even grandparents who want to watch their loved ones play. In British Columbia, there's currently a ban on any large gathering of 50 people or more, and that number can get even smaller depending on the size of the facility to avoid having too many people in one place at one time. So according to Via Sport, the key rule still applies. Really? Sorry, the key rule still applies. You have to stay at least 2 meters away from anyone around you. And a reminder, that's a minimum. In Oakville, Ontario, these young soccer stars are finally about to score some time with their team.
Not exactly train with them, but still see them, interact with them, and that's, I feel, is going to be a lot better for all of us.
A return to the pitch with a parent or friend is one thing. Practicing with their club helps these competitors push one another to be better.
The intensity isn't the exact same as you would being there with your teammates.
While Soccer Ontario unveiled its restart plan in mid-June, many clubs are just trying to get off on the right foot. A recent survey showed 33% of parents would return their kids to the game, 28% under strict conditions, and more than 12% would give a red card to the rest of the year.
You've seen that more in your recreational type player. Whereas in your more competitive player, there's less caution because they're willing to trust the system and come back.
The drop in registration and program fees has led to an 80% drop in revenue and reduction in staff. The uncertainty has Ontario soccer and many local clubs worried.
From an economic recovery standpoint, we're looking at a minimum of 2 years, if not 5 years.
For parents, it's about juggling the need to be cautious with COVID-19 and knowing the benefit the game brings when their kids are together.
I'm more concerned about his well-being mentally, socially, and so you weigh that, and I think we're in a good place moving forward.
For these phenoms, any kind of soccer will do the trick. Kicking it with their club will be that much better. Baseball is considered to be one of the safer sports to play during this pandemic because it's outdoors and mostly non-contact. But the London Badgers have just come back to practice and not on the field all at once.
The middle infielders are going right now on the field. The corner infielders are hitting off in a different area. The outfielders are coming to stretch right now.
Baseball Ontario is limiting return to play to regions in Phase 2 of the province's restart plan, with a limit of 10 players for in-person play. The Badgers are going for even smaller training groups of 5.
These are just my best buddies and my favorite people in the world, so I just get to see them and hang out and play what I love with them.
And what happens when avoiding the spread of COVID-19 forces out the key safety component of spotting from competitive gymnastics?
That was definitely, for me, the hardest thing.
Physical distancing means no one to guide them through these gravity-defying acts.
My coach that I trust and that has spotted me for years, I wasn't going to have her spotting me, and even after a skill, when you do it and you feel happy, I want to just give her a hug, but I can't.
At Flip City Gymnastics in Langley, BC, part of bouncing back from this pandemic means getting back up and pushing forward within your limits.
We wanted to make sure that coaches work with their athletes to ensure that they're staying within the scope of their current abilities and not learning new things too quickly as they return.
Gymnastics BC has already struck a delicate balance. No more spotting, but also other new measures including 2-meter markers, daily screenings, and enhanced cleaning. And sanitizing high-touch areas takes on a whole new spin when it's basically everything in sight.
I think that first day, we were all very nervous and anxious on what the process would look like, but as soon as those kids started coming through the doors, it was just exhilarating.
Seeing any of these athletes in action, there's no doubt this is a rough time for those on the cusp of reaching the next level.
They love to compete, and we can't take that away from them. That's what they love to do. So just be patient, and it will all come back.
But whether it's on the high beam, ball diamond, soccer pitch, or ice, A return to play within this new reality is a common goal across Canada. This pandemic may have forced each activity in every community to adapt and change the way we compete.
Trying hard and doing the drills right and doing them fast.
But the drive to come together through sport is something not even COVID-19 can stop.
That's the physical side. Lots of new rules and adjustments. And as we enter a summer of uncertainty and change, it's having an impact on mental health, too. The school closures, learning online, limited contact with friends, and the cancellation of activities is unsettling. It's hard to measure the scale of the problem because it's still unfolding. Experts do say they've seen a significant increase in demand for counseling services. Canada's largest pediatric centre, the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto, is leading a study examining the mental health impact of the COVID-19 measures on children, youth, and families. Jennifer Crosby is a clinical psychologist and health clinician scientist within the Department of Psychiatry at Sick Kids Hospital. Professor Crosby, thanks for taking time to speak with us. Tell me about this study you're involved in. Who's taking part? What are you measuring and tracking?
Absolutely. So when the COVID measures were put into place, very quickly, those of us who are working in mental health research came together to try to see how we could understand what the impact is on children, families, and youth. So 4 major mental health studies that were already happening in Ontario quickly came together so that we could create a survey and a mechanism of reaching out to families virtually and finding out how they were doing, how they were coping with these emergency measures that were in place. And we're going to track these families over the next 12 months, because it's not just about the initial measures and what the impact was, but what's the impact over time.
I know there are huge variations in how kids cope, but in broad terms, can you tell us what the studies revealed so far about the impact the pandemic has had?
It's very much in line with international data that is showing that children and parents are reporting an increase across a range of concerns, such as anxiety and mood and irritability and attention and concentration. Really, a very large percentage of respondents have said that parents have noticed an increase in these traits from before COVID, and also a lot of uncertainty and worry about what's going to happen down the line.
You know, kids, especially younger ones, tend to want to know what the plan is, what is happening next. With all this uncertainty now, not even knowing if they'll be back in class in the fall, what does that uncertainty potentially lead to?
It has been very difficult, and that uncertainty is a key part of that. You know, I think everybody, initially when the emergency measures went into place, there was families had to cope and come up with new strategies of dealing with that. And to some degree, I think that became a new normal for families. But now as we head into summer and school ends, again, we have a whole new section for kids to kind of think about. So by and large, camps are not happening. If they are happening, they're happening in a very different way. Sport programs not happening. There's still a lot of uncertainty, and you know, every day and every week there's an update and a change, and that uncertainty can be very difficult for kids.
Who's most at risk of developing mental health challenges because of this pandemic?
You know, we don't know the answer to that, and that was really one of the most important elements of this study, is that this is unprecedented. There's so many factors that we need to consider that this data is going to really be key in helping us understand what the impact is and what would be important moving forward if perhaps we need to think about or plan more emergency measures if there's a second wave, or that this goes on for a longer period of time. We're really hoping that this data is going to help us plan and perhaps identify the kids who we should be, and the families and the youth that we should be touching base with earlier, and perhaps providing targeted interventions to help them cope and manage better in these uncertain times.
You know, kids look to us as role models. How important is it that we manage our own anxiety and take care of ourselves and not put too much pressure on ourselves to plan the perfect summer?
Absolutely. I think that's a really important message. Kids do look to adults as their emotional barometer as such. And so modeling managing our anxieties and our worries and sort of being in the moment, setting up some routines that work for your family based on the new situation, providing some normalcy within your family life. We can't control what's going to happen in a month or 2 months or with school or with COVID, but we can set aside dinner times, times of days or times in the week when we play games together, things we do as a family. You can really set a new routine and a new pace with a family, and then kids can really rely on those expectations, and they can know, well, these things are going to stay stable, and so while there's other things that are maybe a little bit uncertain, these are the things that I can count on. So wherever you live across the country, figuring out what is allowable and then kind of facilitating and helping kids get out and reconnect with their social networks to sort of help them re-engage that part of their life, which is so important to them.
If you have young children, you know the challenge of looking after them and trying to work. It's a constant, exhausting juggle. For a lot of parents, childcare is essential, and it's just not back to where it was pre-pandemic. A national survey conducted for the Canadian Childcare Federation found that 36% of childcare centres that closed because of COVID-19 might not reopen at all, and 38% of home daycares could remain closed. Those that are reopening face a precarious financial future. 68% say they're worse off than they were before. Mike Drolet looks at the rocky road to recovery of childcare.
Every day in cities and towns across the country, kids are dropped off to start their days. It's about socialization, the economy, and the collective sanity of parents everywhere.
Oh, she loves daycare. Absolutely loves it.
Beatrice had only been in daycare 3 months when everything shut down. For her mom, Julia McKenzie, it meant balancing the work she had just returned to with the needs of a toddler she now had to care for 24 hours a day.
So maybe about 3 weeks ago, we both kind of said, okay, we don't know how much longer we can do this. We need some help. Do we need to hire a nanny? What are our options here?
There's a lot of guilt and familiarity to parents in those words. With no familial support because of COVID-19, Beatrice spent more time in front of the TV than normal and no time interacting with other kids. After 3 months, she's become distrustful of others.
And in the street, when people walk too close to her, I notice she clings to me. So that's been a huge concern. Actually, it scares me a little bit. I don't want her to become fearful, and I don't want her to learn that it's not okay to play with people.
But in the new reality, Beatrice, who returns to daycare on Monday, is one of the lucky ones because there are fewer childcare spots available. BC has implemented strict rules when it comes to contact and distancing with children, but hasn't assigned a number for how large groups can be. Manitoba recently removed its size restrictions. Quebec will follow suit in July. But Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia have imposed strict limits to keep groups small, which has effectively shrunk the system's capacity. A Toronto City Councillor estimates there will be 56,000 fewer spots in Toronto alone. Amy O'Neill of Treetop Childcare says her centre can't open under the current limit of 10 people per room, including teachers.
So we usually have approximately 155, but we're licensed for many more. With the new reopening guidelines, I could accommodate 24.
Financially, she says they'd be bankrupt within 2 months. And on a personal note, she wants nothing to do with the lotteries other centers have used to assign the spots they do have.
That's not our business to decide who is eligible and who is not.
O'Neill is waiting for direction from the government. Until then, she and the families that rely on her are in limbo. In Peterborough, the staff of nearly a dozen daycares decided the situation was untenable and recently took to the streets to protest. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did announce an aid package this past week, stating what some critics say was pretty obvious.
Well, childcare is going to require more spaces, more rooms, more space, different modifications, which will cost more money. So we want to be there to help that.
Childcare advocates are asking that $2.5 billion of the $14 billion pledged be earmarked to help address critical issues. Beyond that, Carolyn Ferns of the Ontario Coalition for Better Childcare says the guidelines as a whole are far too restrictive. In Ontario, children can be picked up by their teachers provided a blanket is between them. And that blanket can't be used again.
I know that from early childhood educators that I have spoken with,
That's one of their top concerns. They don't want to be running a childcare program with children in chalk squares.
And even more perplexing is this nugget from the province's 20 pages of guidelines. Children should not do activities that involve sharing toys, and they should avoid singing.
Well, if you know a toddler, that's just not a realistic expectation.
Considering the push for small groups, home daycares would seem to be a logical alternative. Over half of WeWatch's 1,000 homes continued to operate during the pandemic, and they have a list of new daycares ready to go. But the first aid courses they need for certification are still closed.
We could have 120 spaces available pretty quickly, but we can't get the certification. And we've asked if they could do small group sizes, like one-on-ones or maybe 3 providers in a room. Like, we'll social distance them, we can do the whole thing. Like, how do we work around this? And we just can't seem to get anywhere.
It's more red tape, more rules, more uncertainty for an essential service.
I don't know, they keep saying it's based on medicine and evidence, and I wonder if it's more political.
Putting excessive guidelines around children is impractical, argues Dr. Anna Banerjee, because they're considered low risk to a virus that is unlikely to be completely eradicated.
I don't think we can contain it. I think we can slow it down, but I think until we have a vaccine or until there's enough herd immunity, COVID's going to be around for a while.
These next few months will be critical for childcare providers to prove they can handle outbreaks and provide a reprieve for parents.
It's having a huge impact on people as well. You can only hold back the floodgates for so long.
Still ahead.
I swear.
Taking the oath.
That I will be faithful.
The new reality of becoming a Canadian citizen. And up next,
we have to keep our guard up.
Advice from BC's top doctor.
Until we have either an effective treatment or a vaccine, I don't see large gatherings in our near future.
Dr. Bonnie Henry on the future of weddings, opening the border, and preventing a second wave.
When the news broke back in March that BC had Canada's first death from COVID-19 in a long-term care home in North Vancouver, just across the water from here, there was fear. Would BC become the epicenter of an outbreak in Canada? It could have, if it weren't for the quick and smart response from BC's provincial health officer. The New York Times calls her the top doctor who aced the coronavirus test. Dr. Bonnie Henry has barely had a day off since the beginning of 2020. And it's her decisive action and clear, calm communication that's kept BC's numbers low.
Be kind, to be calm, and to be safe. To be kind, to be calm, and to be safe.
Words many in BC live by, and words that have become so popular, there's a cottage industry of Bonnie Henry merchandise for sale, most of the proceeds going to charity. From the start of the pandemic, people connected to her intelligence and her empathy. And following her advice has saved lives. BC has lost just over 170 people to COVID-19. Ontario, which has 3 times the number of people, has had more than 15 times as many deaths. And this is not over. The virus has not vanished, and this summer is going to be another test. Dr. Bonnie Henry is with me from Victoria. Dr. Henry, when I first interviewed you in early April, there was no talk about lifting restrictions. Case numbers were still rising. Now it's almost July, and restrictions are being lifted in phases almost everywhere. And you say that this will be a unique summer. Are you nervous?
If there's one thing we've learned about this virus is that we can't underestimate it, and we have to keep our guard up. I think we've done that really well here in BC, so I'm not sure I'm nervous. I do have an underlying level of anxiety that started in January that continues. But if people continue to do what we've been able to do here in BC, and I'm focusing on making sure our public health teams are ready to do our part as well, and we've been able to do that, we will see cases, but I believe we can manage that.
You're advising people to keep their bubbles small this summer. As Canadians plan their vacations, what do you think they should aim for, not just in BC, but elsewhere in Canada too?
You know, I think it's really important for us to take the summer to have some time to breathe and to connect with the people that are important to us in our lives. But we also can't lose sight of the fact that this pandemic is still ongoing. So we need to find that balance. So keeping small numbers of people, where we would have the big family gathering of 100, 150, it needs to be much smaller than that this year.
Do you think it's likely that gatherings like big weddings and funerals and conventions might be too risky to hold until there's a vaccine?
Yes, I think that unfortunately is the way it's going to be for the near future. This is not forever, but definitely for the coming months into the fall, until we have either an effective treatment or a vaccine, large gatherings like that just are too risky.
You know, you've got some power, Dr. Henry. Your calm guidance has made BC a model for the rest of the world. The New York Times, as you know, calls you the doctor who aced the coronavirus test. And now you've even told the NHL it has to abide by your rules. You're not going to compromise those rules so Vancouver can be a hub for NHL games. What's your bottom line on the NHL?
I don't know that that's the particular reason. We did have discussions through the Canucks around some of the things that I think are important. And, you know, for me and us here in public health and the health system here, focusing on maintaining the health, making sure that we don't compromise any of the work that we've put in BC to protecting our communities here. And it's also important to make sure that any of the teams, the players that came to BC were also protected. So there is no compromise on that at all.
Let me ask you about the American border. I know it's not your job to decide whether it reopens or not, but given what you see is happening in many states, the surge in cases, would you want it to open in July?
You know, we have had many talks with our federal counterparts about this. I do think it's important to have family reunification, and we've been supporting that. But no, opening for visitors right now is very risky for us. And I think my colleagues across Canada, we all feel quite strongly about that.
The million-dollar question right now is, will there be a second wave? What are your fears about that? And what do you think are our biggest vulnerabilities to that in Canada right now?
What I would like to see in our best case scenario is that we continue to grumble along and control things. Maybe at some point we can get it down to no cases in a couple of days. But you know, realistically, looking at what's happened around the world, it's likely that we will see surges, we'll see small outbreaks as we have more people who are getting together. And that's why it's so important for us to keep our numbers of connections low so that we can find people quickly, that we can do the work in public health to contain it. But we need to be prepared that when respiratory season starts, we may see an uptick in both influenza and COVID, and we'll need to be able to manage that, to have the testing capacity and the contact tracing capacity. So that's what we're planning for the fall. You know, we'll hope for the best, but as somebody has said to me, hope is not a strategy. So we need to plan for what will happen should we start getting more cases, particularly when influenza season starts.
Where did your mantra, be kind, be calm, be safe, come from?
It really was a bit of a compilation. You know, I was trying to figure out how we could get the message across that we need to be in this together and we need to understand where other people are coming from. We are in this storm, the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And by supporting each other and doing what we need to do together is how we'll all get through this storm.
Coming up,
am I making the right choice?
Putting travel to the test.
We are now at a period of time that we need to learn how to coexist with the virus.
How airlines and passengers are preparing to fly again.
As businesses big and small across Canada begin to reopen, there's one sector that has stalled: travel, especially the airline industry. Air Canada has laid off 20,000 people, more than half of its workforce. And this week, WestJet announced it is laying off more than 3,300 workers. Domestic flights are still happening, though much reduced. It's international air travel that's really tanked. Passenger arrivals at Canadian airports were down 95% last week compared to 2019. That's according to the Canada Border Services Agency. If you do decide to fly, the rules around air travel are changing, both for airlines and for passengers. Crystal Goomansingh shows us how.
The Colosseum is an iconic symbol of the past. Its future, however, rests in the sanitized hands of its visitors. So many of the world's top attractions are reopening, but to fall in love with these sites, something else has to happen first. People have to start flying again.
Hi, my name is Miranda DePerno, and I was last on a flight April 28th, flying from Montreal to Vancouver.
April was the worst month on record for the aviation sector. The industry bottomed out as the deadly pandemic swept across Europe and over to North America. The company that directs air traffic above the UK, some of the busiest airspace in the world, created this flight comparison showing just how different the sky appeared in April 2019 compared to April this year.
I felt pretty all right with things. I think perhaps it has to do with my age, but I know my mom was very nervous about flying. And everyone on the flight was like some people were in full like painter's suits with their hair tucked away and goggles and masks and gloves and everything. Everyone had a mask on. Most people had gloves on, and then the energy of the flight, I could feel the air so just intense, like you could hear a pin drop.
What a surreal experience.
Yeah, even just, the body language of the people around you, I think we've kind of gotten into this place with flights where we're trying to claim space, and I could feel, instead of, people's shoulders being back and kind of spreading out and wanting to take that space, it was almost the exact opposite, where it was all these layers and scarves and just people wanted as much, to be kept to themselves as possible.
Keeping ourselves locked away at home was exactly what we were all directed to do. Now the message is changing.
We are now at a period of time that we need to learn how to coexist with the virus.
The International Air Transport Association says resuming air travel is key to restarting economies. However, the agency's own polling shows flyers in 11 countries, including Canada, are hesitant. 3 sets of polls by IATA shows overall concern about the virus remains high for Canadians, going from 63% in February to 80% this month. When it comes to the question of returning to travel, the majority of those polled, 55%, say they'll wait at least 6 months before traveling.
Hello, my name is Rani Suleiman, and I flew from London, UK to Toronto, Canada on June 19th. I had a lot of anxiety around that because I was like, am I making the right choice? Traveling, it wasn't busy. It wasn't full by any means. And I think that went a long way in alleviating some of the stress that I had, because the middle seats were all blocked off. And while I was placed in a pod of 3, the middle seat was empty, and then there was a gentleman sitting on the aisle side.
Public health is a new layer to air travel safety. The industry is replicating what's being done in other sectors to try and protect people from COVID-19. Masks are universal, temperature checks are widely used. Some countries are opting to test travelers, and cleaning efforts have been enhanced in airports and on planes. Non-essential foreign travel is still not recommended for Canadians, but come next month, the plan is for most of Europe to reopen to international visitors. A big part of the reason comes down to money.
Greece is ready to welcome tourists this summer by putting their safety and their health as our #1 priority.
In some countries, visitors have to quarantine, but there is a huge amount of pressure from industry on governments to scrap those restrictions. They're seen as yet another barrier to restarting air travel.
From this vantage point at London City Airport, we should be watching lots of planes coming and going, but there just isn't the demand. Airlines this year expect to post a loss of $84 million, and that will have a ripple effect on millions of jobs attached to the sector.
The passenger is going to have more responsibilities. He's going to have to be fit for travel, which in the past wasn't necessarily the case. But that's what's going to help us reduce the risk.
But many people don't know they're sick. Travel has led to new infections. New Zealand was virus-free for weeks until 2 seemingly healthy women visited from the UK and ended up testing positive. Beijing saw flights canceled recently, and new clusters of COVID-19 led to localized lockdowns.
This is where risk becomes such an interesting concept to mull over. My personal opinion is if you don't need to travel, then don't travel.
Until there's some kind of, vaccine or people are feeling comfortable with where the numbers are at, I do think the way that we gather around one another, be it in a plane or on the bus or on the subway, there's definitely going to be a new awareness and consciousness of who is around you and what sounds, sneezes, fluids are maybe coming from your area.
The industry is working to rebuild consumer confidence. The recovery from COVID-19 is expected to take years. Airlines are banking on there not being a second wave and on our desire to get back out and see the world.
Next on The New Reality,
give yourself one more day.
Creating a lifeline.
It's a tough time, but good things are coming from it.
The new program helping Canada's Indigenous youth when they need it most.
The impact of the pandemic on the mental health of Canadians is still being measured, but we know social isolation, uncertainty about the future is having an impact, and it's especially acute in Indigenous communities. A new survey this week from Stats Canada found 60% of Indigenous people say their mental health has worsened since the onset of physical distancing measures. Overall, 38% reported fair or poor mental health. That's 22% higher than in the most recent Aboriginal Peoples survey. Well before COVID-19, too many young Indigenous people were crying out for help. As Jeff Semple tells us, there's at least one new resource now offering help that's a phone call away.
Ashley Cummings' childhood photos carry mixed emotions.
This one is me and my dad. He read to me a lot every night when I was little.
The good times, growing up in Nunavut, snowmobiling with her parents, and the tough times as a teenager, losing several cousins and friends to suicide.
Suicide has been a very prominent part of my life since I was a young child.
As an Inuk, she knows all too well how the suicide rate among Inuit is one of the highest in the world, almost 10 times the Canadian average. And when she was 16, she almost became one of those statistics.
Because it was just such a very visceral pain that I was being, or I guess I was almost subjecting myself through because I didn't know how to deal with any of it.
But she found a lifeline in the form of a text message conversation with an anonymous volunteer from Kids Help Phone.
They were able to figure it out and help me take the advice and listen and get me out of that crisis mode.
Thank you for calling Kids Help Phone. How can I help you?
The Canadian charity has provided counseling services for over 3 decades and launched a new program last year targeting Indigenous youth.
We're looking, of course, at service use and doing everything we can to ensure we're reaching Indigenous young people where they live and that our services are meeting their unique needs.
The manager of the program, called Finding Hope, says they're expanding and promoting their services in Indigenous communities, such as Pine House, Saskatchewan. The remote northern village is home to breathtaking beauty and terrible poverty. Kids Help Phone is partnering with a local photography club, helping youth to see the world through a different lens.
Photography saved my life and the beauty, seeing the beauty through a lens
and instead of looking at the past and all that, and going through the rough times again.
For many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit kids across Canada, they don't have access to health or mental health services or supports on a regular basis.
Kids Help Phone offers support remotely, 24/7, by phone, online chat, and text message.
If young people's eyes are on a screen right now, then that's where the mental health supports need to be.
At the start of the year, they were receiving more than 1,000 text messages per month from Indigenous youth. And that was before the biggest mental health crisis the organization has ever seen.
Go home and stay home. This is what we all need to be doing.
And I just know how stressful it is for our healthcare system, for my colleagues, and for families.
The COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown saw demand for Kids Help Phone services skyrocket. More than 1,500 cries for help, calls and messages every day, up 350% compared to last year.
They're dealing with isolation. They're stressed, more stressed than they've ever been before. There's a lot of grieving and loss, young people who aren't able to connect with their friends, maybe they're missing graduation. And then we've also seen a real increase in contacts around other things like abuse and neglect. So for some young people, home is not a safe place.
The charity has called emergency services around 10 times a day during the pandemic when needed to respond to a suicide attempt. And that need is greatest in communities that were already struggling.
The anxiety that Indigenous youth feel is heightened in a lot of respects for a number of reasons. I mean, there isn't the same access to health care in a lot of these remote communities. We're telling people over and over again, wash your hands, but we have 100 or so First Nations that are on water advisories right now where that might not be safe. We've got poverty, which is affecting so many Indigenous young people, and we don't have space to socially isolate or physically isolate within the home. These things are causing anxiety for young people.
Faced with that unprecedented need, Kids Help Phone called for backup, asking ordinary Canadians to volunteer to provide emotional support to anonymous strangers over text message. The charity's chief youth officer admits it was a big ask.
We put a call out. We said, hey, people across Canada, raise your hand, join us, take a training. It's a 36-hour training. They do a police background check, and then they sign on to our platform.
And the response was overwhelming.
We had almost 9,000 Canadians raise their hand and say that they wanted to be a part of supporting young people, which to me was huge. We are on track right now to train more people in the next few weeks than we have trained in the last 2 years together.
One of those volunteer crisis responders says it's a win-win.
There's very few volunteer opportunities, I believe, that you can walk at the end of your shift or walk at the end of your day and say, well, I've potentially saved someone's life today.
And thanks to those volunteers, for the first time in its history, Kids Help Phone is now also offering services to adults.
More and more adults were coming to us and they were starting the conversation with, I'm so sorry, I'm not a kid, or can I use this service? And we realized there aren't enough places for adults who are also going through the same distress, the same isolation.
It's a tough time, but good things are coming from it.
Dunham says they've also received a large number of Indigenous volunteers offering to provide support to others in need. One of them is Ashley Cummings, now a member of the charity's Indigenous Advisory Council.
I feel like I'm doing so much better now. It definitely makes me emotional knowing that a lot of other youth are facing very similar or the same kind of circumstances where it just feels like there's too much. I think my message would be to just give yourself one more day. It's all about those little baby steps that build up to large feats of figuring out your mental health.
Anyone who needs mental health support can call Kids Help Phone at 1-800-668-6868 or text 686868. The service is available 24 hours a day, and as we mentioned, it's for kids and adults. The New Reality will be right back. Among the countless things put on hold by the pandemic were citizenship ceremonies, that moment when newcomers take the oath that makes them officially Canadian. Like so much these days, those moments have migrated to online. And last week, in a digitally adapted ceremony, the latest crop of new Canadians raised their hands.
I swear that I will be faithful.
A simple oath that's a life-changing moment. These new Canadians, all of whom were forced to flee their homeland of Syria, searching for a new beginning, finding one in Canada, now starting life in a new, safe place to call home.
As a Canadian citizen. Félicitations.
Merci beaucoup. Félicitations tout le monde.
To honor them and all new Canadians, we leave you with the a cappella voices of the West Coast Harmony Chorus from Surrey, BC. I'm Dawna Friesen. Good night.